Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Patch 11.2 is finally here, and with a brand new major content update, we got some new seasonal content from dungeons, raids, and even delves. Well, delves in particular getting a bit of a shakeup, with the brand receiving a bunch of new curios, additional levels, we got new versions of different delves that we can run, but also new rewards and a new delve challenge. Similar to the Zekvir of Season 1 and the Underpin of Season 2, we have the return of Nexus-Princes Ky'veza from the Nerebar Palace, returning as the nemesis for Season 3 content. And just like the previous delve bosses, this one is also will be available on two difficulties, the base version as well as the hard mode version. And defeating this boss on that hard mode difficulty, or the tier question mark difficulty, allows you to gain exclusive cosmetic rewards for defeating this true unfathomable challenge. And after defeating the boss by myself solo on the hard mode difficulty, I gotta say this is definitely the most challenging boss that we've had since Zekvir and Underpin. However, this one also feels like it has the most amount of skill expression behind this encounter, with a lot of one-shots along the way. So for today's video, I wanted to do a guide on how to defeat Nexus-Princes Ky'veza on the hard mode hardest difficulty for Season 3 content, so you can claim all of your rewards for yet another season of Delves in War Within. As always, if you guys want to see more guides such as these for the patch 11.2, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So first things first, I do want to go over the mechanics of this boss encounter, as a lot of these will actually be something you could practice on a base version, but also something that you'll be able to transfer into hardcore as well, or like the hard mode version of this encounter, the tier question mark difficulty. First things first about Ky'veza, you need to know a number of these abilities, and the order in which I'll talk about them is also very important. Nexus Dagger will be the very first ability that you'll be able to meet when it comes to fighting this boss, where the boss tosses out daggers in a frontal but leaving some gaps for you to get in a safe area. However, she'll also spawn clones to do the same, and they'll sometimes spawn far apart or sometimes really close, so you gotta be really fast on your feet to find a safe spot while dodging all of the daggers, and if you get hit by this mechanic at any point, it's an immediate one-shot, but technically avoidable, especially on one of the more mobile classes. The Nether Rift is the next ability that follows afterwards, where the boss places a rift on two targets and one separate location. As a solo fight, it always goes on Bran and you. Bran will automatically go in the position where he needs to be, and you'll want to put your rift in a position that's equidistant away from all these other rifts. Because once the rifts are down, then they'll start to draw everybody in with gravity, but if they're far apart away where they kind of make a triangle shape and they're equidistant far apart from each other, they end up canceling each other out, and that's essentially what you want to do. However, putting two rifts too close to each other allows the gravity to pull you towards the rifts, and if you touch a rift while it's pulling you away, that will also be yet another one-shot. The next ability is Dark Massacre, where Ky'veza will summon clones one at a time to charge through the player. To avoid being one-shot by this mechanic is to face the clones, and that's the only thing you can really do, and the order in which the clones spawn in is also very random. Sometimes they'll spawn far away, sometimes they'll spawn close by, and sometimes they'll spawn right inside of one another, so keeping up with clones, you basically gotta have your head on a swivel and be enraged to turn and face them as they charge at you. And this one can definitely be a little bit tougher, especially on the hard mode difficulty. The final mechanic you should know about is Invoke the Shadows, where Ky'veza will summon 5 clones to the center of the arena, and then she'll join this clone circle in the center. Then these clones will shuffle around in the middle of the arena. This is where you need to track which one of these clones is Ky'veza, because after they do that, they'll start a cast, and you gotta click on the right one that is Ky'veza, fail, and then it will be yet another one-shot. Also, every time the boss does this phase of Invoke the Shadows, she also gains a 5% damage buff that stacks throughout the fight. Also, all of the other mechanics that I mentioned, like the daggers, there's not a lot of outgoing damage there. The rifts do have some outgoing damage, as they do in the Suck In, and even the Dark Massacre, when the clones charge through you, if they don't one-shot you, they will still do a little bit of damage, so this 5% damage with all these one-shots will start to really stack up over time. And the boss will always use these abilities in a very specific rotation, starting with the daggers as soon as you pull the boss, then going into the rift, then following up with the Dark Massacre clones afterwards, then into daggers, then back into rift, back into the clones with Dark Massacre, finally back into daggers, and then she does Invoke the Shadows. And then from there, after you catch her with the barrel minigame is what a lot of people call it, afterwards it resets and repeats for the rest of the encounter, with her getting a 5% damage buff every time she does invoke the Shadows minigame. And the changes for this fight on normal mode and the hard mode, there's actually not a lot. This fight is exactly the same whether you do it on the base difficulty or the hard mode difficulty. However, all of the abilities are slightly deadlier, like the Nexus daggers will fire up more daggers more regularly, so it's a lot more for you to dodge. Can be a little bit tough, but not really all that bad if you get really good RNG with the daggers. The nether rifts will now have these pie slices that will limit the possible places where you could spawn in your rifts. However, you're always placing the rifts equidistant from each other in a triangle shape, and you're never really going to put them together anyway, so it kind of just like blocks off areas that you normally wouldn't really be using. It's not really anything that makes the fight that much more challenging, to be honest. The Dark Massacre, however, will summon more clones for you to face, which means there's even more of an opportunity for you to get one-shot by any of these clones, and since there's more clones, it becomes a little bit harder for you to keep up with which clone you gotta face next, and you can get pretty easily confused without doing a couple of rounds of this fight to really get used to the pacing of this mechanic. Also, Invoke the Shadows minigame, the barrel minigame, the clones will now shuffle faster, and they'll shuffle around a lot more, so it becomes a little bit harder for you to track Ky'veza, though not completely impossible, especially if you face your camera all the way to the ground so that you can track the clones from above. I found that to be a little bit easier in tracking their exact location, especially when it comes to following Ky'veza on the hard mode difficulty. Another thing that's worth noting is certain classes, or rather certain roles, in my opinion, do have a little bit of easier time with this encounter. Technically, most DPS specs should be able to do this fight, but it's only going to get easier once you get better gear in the season. Doing it early on with Season 2 gear is very rough, resulting in a lot of these fights with Ky'veza being very lengthy, which means there's an opportunity for you, I guess more chances for you to get one-shot by any of the mechanics, but also Ky'veza will keep building up the damage buff, so any unavoidable, not one-shotted damage will continue to spike up over time. And with Brand being on a lower level, he's not really the greatest at healing as of this moment. That being said, I do think this fight is easier, at least with early gear on a tanking spec. At least from a survivability aspect, since you're gonna have a long encounter with this boss either way. Without any good gear within Season 3, you can't really shorten this encounter by too much, but once you can get better gear, I think DPS classes are gonna have a much easier time with it. Though if you do want to have the easier time right now, tanks are having an easiest time because anything that is not one-shottable damage, any passive damage or damage from rifts, tanks for the most part can survive it. It does mean that your encounter, however, is going to be extra long. For me, my encounter took me about 9 minutes and 36 seconds, though many tank support on average about a 10-minute runs, where you have to be locked in for all 10 of those minutes, dodging all of these one-shot mechanics and playing the fight accordingly. It is a tough encounter without higher end gear, so this is definitely going to be a challenge that will be made easier and will go by faster as we get better gear in Season 3. But if you really do want to give this a go really early on, I do think a tank is going to be one of the safer, to some degree, choices, at least as of this moment. Now, another thing you got to take a note of is the Brand's setup. However, right now I don't really have a lot of good curios for Brand, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of great curios for this encounter specifically. If you are doing this fight as a DPS, you have to have Brand as a healer. And Brand will end up throwing out these healing potions throughout the encounter, which you will need to stagger. By staggering, it means you don't want to pick up all the potions at once. You want to pick up one potion, then let some time pass, pick up a second potion, and then prolong it with the third potion so you get the most amount of healing out of those potions. Because if you pick up 3, they'll get to 3 stacks, they'll be very potent, but they'll run out very, very quickly. But if you stagger them, you get to prolong and spend more time getting healed by those potions, and by then, Brand should throw out a new set of potions so you're constantly getting healed. As a tank, however, you'll want to run Brand in DPS, so Brand could deal a substantial bit of damage. However, Brand is a DPS, and it really feels like they didn't really test Brand for this encounter that much, but he does a couple of weird things as a DPS specifically. Sometimes he just doesn't move, especially for the Rift ability. And sometimes he's caught up on his Griffin, throwing out Storm Hammers, which does a lot of damage, but while he's on a Griffin, he can't control where he's going to be able to place those rifts. Oftentimes, when he gets off of the Griffin, he walks over Void Rifts and immediately dies, so then he just sits there for a while, kind of messing up your rifts. For this purpose specifically, I found Blood Deathly to be one of the better tanks for this encounter, just because you have abilities like Death's Advance, which prevents the pull mechanic from hitting you. Technically, other tanks, if they have decent enough mobility, can deal with this okay, but it just becomes an extra layer of hectic mechanics that you have to deal with, and for Blood Death Knights, you were able to avoid it completely, but they really gotta fix Brand as a DPS, especially on that Griffin. They gotta do something because it just ends up being really, really bad for the encounter. As for the actual couriers for Brand, I honestly think there's not a lot of good options, unless I can maybe get some higher version of these couriers, but the best one I found to use is Hattering. Brand has a chance to pull out a random hat, throw it into the boss, which can debuff the boss, including a 20% damage taken increase, 20% damage decrease, or attack and cast speed decrease. I mostly use the Hattering because it is the hardest hitting ability in Brand's kit. The rest of his kit, unfortunately, doesn't hit that hard, but Hattering itself procs often enough and it can crit the boss for up to 14 million, which is a sizable DPS output overall, and actually makes Brand kind of usable. Then we have the utility curio, and honestly, I have no idea which one is the best. None of them really seem that fitting for this fight, especially someone like Sands of Koresh, but I found Audi Amplification Crystal kind of okay. Every time Brand says a voice line, he can either empower you with a damage reduction or a damage amp or any variety of different buffs based on the words that he says. And the uptime of this buff was decent enough in my opinion where at least you get some value out of it, but honestly, it really doesn't matter whether you run Battered Aegis or Tailwind Conduit or even Temporal Decelerator Crystal. None of them seem to be amazing for this encounter specifically, so it really comes down to your personal choice. I think DPS classes may enjoy Tailwind Conduit, which gives you a shield, which is pretty solid, especially when you use a defensive ability, and that can help you survive parts of the encounter that cannot be avoided in terms of the non-avoidable, non-one-shottable damage abilities. But outside of this, there's no really good curio, in my opinion, that could really make this fight that much easier. I think just getting raw levels on Brand, getting him way above level 80 is going to be super helpful. As the tier goes on, it's going to be made a little bit easier with being able to actually get bountiful keys and unlock bountiful chests from delves. But with that being said, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this update. If you did enjoy this guide or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciated. Also, be sure to join our Discord community, especially if you got any questions regarding Ky'veza. There's a good chance maybe somebody in our Discord community might be able to give you a couple of pointers, depending on the different class or spec that you're taking on in this challenge. As always, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.